sitting in cells for months and months and months at a time, and that the last Conservative from Port Moody Coquitlam was an anti-abortionist. I want to know for sure today, right now, does the member support a woman's right to choose? And is the member going to take away a woman's right to choose if they ever, and I hope it never happens, becomes a government in this country?
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
No.
And that's all the time we have for that. Statements by members. The Honourable Member for Nepean. Oh, wait a minute. The Honourable Member for Moose Jaw, Lake Centre, Lanigan.
Wait. Okay.
Yeah. Well, we'll try that. Order. Statement by members. The Honourable Member, Moose Jaw, Lake Centre, Lanigan.
Mr. Speaker, on April 1st, the Royal Canadian Air Force celebrated its centennial anniversary. This anniversary recognizes not only the importance of the Royal Canadian Air Force to Canada, it also recognizes all those who have served and sacrificed. Moose Jaw, home to 15 Wing, was originally part of the British Commonwealth Air Training Program, generally considered the greatest aircrew training program of all time. This tradition continues today through the NFTC program, and 15 Wing is also home to the Canadian Armed Forces Snowbird Air Demonstration Team. The Snowbirds have close ties to their local community, where the newest WHL champions, the Moose Jaw Warriors, donning the Snowbirds logo on their jersey. The Snowbirds showcase the professionalism and dedication of the RCAF and all other branches of the Canadian Armed Forces. On behalf of all Canadians, I congratulate the RCAF on their centennial, and I invite everyone to join me for Air Force Day on the Hill at 5 o'clock today at Sir John A. Macdonald Building. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Nepean.
Mr. Speaker, I had the pleasure of attending the Hong Kong Canada Business Association Ottawa Chapter's annual event celebrating the 40th anniversary of HKCBA and the Asian Heritage Month. I would like to thank Frank Ng, the President of the Ottawa Chapter, and Jesse Zhang for organizing this successful event and for inviting me. For many years, I have attended various events organized by this organization. This year's program included workshop with Mark Kruger, who was previous IMF representative for Canada and a senior policy director for Bank of Canada. Participants included Sonia Chong, the National Chair, Joseph Chong, the National Vice Chair, Jody Robinson, Executive Director, China Trade and Investment at Global Affairs Canada, several elected officials, and over 150 business professionals. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dorval-Lachine-LaSalle.
40 years ago, June 1984 was seared on the Sikh psyche. The Indian Army stormed the Golden Temple in Amritsar, as well as countless other gurdwaras. A religious holiday where thousands of pilgrims would be visiting, this day was chosen to maximize damage to Sikh lives. The result of the carnage was such that the bullet-riddled bodies of pilgrims, men whose hands were still tied behind their backs, were being thrown in trucks by the hundreds to be mass cremated. This included babies and even elderly who were weak but still alive. The sacred pool had turned red with their blood. The surrounding holy buildings damaged, the marble floors cracked under the heavy army tanks. The library that contained centuries of text was burned to ashes. Over this days and days, this terror was unleashed upon these innocent lives. No one could come and go. No help came. Imprisoned and easy, vulnerable targets. There is no justification for this attack. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle. A long-standing pro-independence activist, Micheline Labelle, passed away on April 16th at the age of 84. Her family will be receiving condolences on Saturday. This important intellectual of modern Quebec left her mark on all those who crossed paths with her kindness and her open-mindedness. She had a PhD in anthropology from the University of Montreal and was always interested in the problems of racism and discrimination. She created an international observatory on these issues. The observatory has attracted the support of partners such as the Grand Council of the CRIs and the Table de concertation au service des réfugiés et des immigrants. As Professor Emeritus at the Department of Sociology at UQAM University, she left her mark on generations of students. She also earned the Equality Prize, Thérèse Casgrain Prize, in 1989 for her commitment to equality. She fought all her life for secularism, and we must honor her memory by continuing to fight for secularism. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Orléans.
Monsieur le Président, aujourd'hui, c'est le jour de l'aviation royale.
Mr. Speaker, today is Royal Canadian Air Force Day on the Hill. Today is the opportunity to celebrate the incredible work of the Royal Canadian Air Force on the occasion of its centennial. For 100 years, RCAF members have served Canadians at home and all around the world. We thank them for their incredible dedication to Canada. RCAF aviators have been involved in missions around the world. They participated in missions during the Second World War, during the Cold War. They've participated in NATO and NORAD operations too. Today, our government is making the largest investment in the RCAF since the Second World War. The RCAF represents the best of Canada, and its members can count on our unwavering support. Today and always, we thank all current and former members. It is thanks to them that the RCAF enjoys a reputation for professionalism, dedication, and excellence.
The Honourable Member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is in trouble. The OECD calculated that Canada's economic growth will be the worst of nearly 40 advanced economies for this decade and for 3 decades to come. Of course, the Liberal solution to any problem is tax, tax, tax. Their capital gains increase is their latest tax grab. They say it'll only affect 0.13% of Canadians. But this is the same government that tells us that we get more in carbon tax rebate than we pay in carbon tax. It's laughable. At a time when Canada desperately needs investment, growth, and innovators, this government is pushing them out the door. This is not the answer. A future Conservative government will make work pay again. We will celebrate success, not demonize it. We will build a path to prosperity and eliminate those dream-crushing barriers along the way. We're on the side of hope, growth, prosperity, and they're on the side of decay, decline, and poverty.
The Honourable Member from Niagara Centre.
Mr. Speaker, each month a student at Notre Dame College School in Welland is awarded the Super Locker. This honor is awarded to students who perform simple acts of kindness at their school and throughout their community. Today, I'm proud to congratulate Samantha Calderon, Desiree St. Jean, Jose Palma Alfaro, Stacy Ekosimi, Nicole Berry, Rachel Taylor, Ana Sofia Gonzalez, TJ Joseph, Serena Hounslow, Ava Menery, and Luca Giancola for receiving the Super Locker Award this year. These remarkable students demonstrate the importance of helping each other, showing compassion, and most importantly, spreading kindness, inspiring others to strengthen our responsibility to our citizenship based on the values handed down to us by previous generations of Canadians. Whether it's a warm smile, small acts of generosity, or a word of encouragement, we can always make a positive difference. Let's join the Fighting Irish in congratulating these students, and let's reaffirm our commitment to spreading kindness to make the world a better place. Thank you, Mr.
Speaker. The Honourable Member from Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
Mr. Speaker, my hometown of Dartmouth rests on the shores of Halifax Harbour on beautiful Dartmouth Cove. 2 years ago, a proponent applied to use Dartmouth Cove as a dump for pyritic slate from construction sites to infill nearly 7 acres of this cove. A cove where important marine research and activities take place, where evidence clearly shows that fish and other species are flourishing. The local councillor made it very clear that this infill would be a moonscape, not zoned for development. Dartmouth spoke out. We continue to speak out against this infill for the sake of infill, because Dartmouth Cove is not a dump for someone's fill. Now the proponent, Mr. Speaker, is threatening to sue me if I speak out. I was elected to represent the people of Dartmouth Cole Harbour, to be their voice. It is my job to bring their concerns to Ottawa, to advocate
to stand up, to speak out. Dartmouth Cove is not a dump site for someone's fill. Mr. Speaker, I will not be silenced.
Here, here. Way to go. Way to go, Jared.
The honourable member from Mission, Matsqui, Fraser Valley.
Fraser Canyon. Mr. Speaker, at a time when food insecurity is skyrocketing and millions are lining up at food banks, this government is bringing forward a punishing capital gains tax hike that will disproportionately affect family farms and small business. According to the Grain Growers of Canada, it will amount to a 30% increase on what farmers have to pay Ottawa when they pass on their family business to their son or daughter. Conservatives have fought hard to preserve family farming, including passing Bill C-208 in the last Parliament, but the Liberals are trying to undo it with a punishing capital gains tax hike. It's like they're trying to outlaw family businesses. If families can't afford to farm, it will lead to more industrial farming and higher food costs. Why is this government trying to kill family farms when all they want to do is put high-quality, affordable food on our tables? Mr. Speaker, how is any of this fair?
The honourable member from Oakville North, Burlington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Gun violence is a public health issue that includes suicide, gender-based violence, and gun crime. Last Friday was National Day Against Gun Violence. In 2022, I worked with the Toronto Raptors' John Wiggins to create a day that honors those killed by gun violence and commit to eliminate gun violence in all its forms. Last year, the Prime Minister declared the National Day Against Gun Violence would be observed in Canada on the first Friday in June. Last year, we joined the Toronto Raptors and many community organizations who advocate for community safety and anti-gun violence. This year, I hosted a roundtable with Halton MPs to hear from local organizations who are doing great work with youth in our community with funding through the Building Safer Communities Fund. I was pleased to see MPs and community organizations across the country recognize the National Day Against Gun Violence with events raising awareness on the issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Cypress Hills, Grasslands.
Mr. Speaker, farmers and small businesses are the backbone of the Canadian economy, particularly in rural Canada. Yet after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, they continue to try new ways to divide Canadians. The Prime Minister is hiking taxes on farmers again, but we're in the middle of a food price crisis. What these Liberals fail to understand is after 40 years on the family farm, the blood, sweat, and tears that go into being successful isn't about to fund the Prime Minister's socialism experiment with the NDP. It's about filling a need in a community. It's about feeding a hungry world. Growing a farm or a business is about providing jobs and dignity for people. I talked to Alan, a 74-year-old farmer back home who's looking to sell some farmland for his retirement. Thanks to the proposed Liberal changes to capital gains, he will lose over $500,000 from his retirement. If the family farm can't survive, big industrial multinational conglomerate billionaires will take over. But that's what the Prime Minister wants. How is that fair for Canadians?
The honourable member from Peterborough, Kawartha.
93-year-old Liz Diachin, who will have to pay $40,000 in capital gains because she's trying to gift her grandson and daughter land, has a message for the Prime Minister. She's not rich. She doesn't have $40,000 extra dollars. She's trying to help her family, and she would like to know which bank would lend a 93-year-old $40,000. Peter from Peterborough also has a message for the Prime Minister. He wants to know why the Liberals think it's okay to change the rules that dictate his retirement plan. He purchased an investment property in 1986 that was supposed to be his retirement. And now, because of these Liberals' increase in capital gains, he no longer has enough money to retire. The Liberals claim they want tax fairness for every generation. So how is destroying Canadians' retirement fair?
The honourable member from Northwest Territories.
Mr. Speaker, 16 years ago today, this country experienced an unprecedented moment. National leaders of the Indigenous Organizations of Canada stood on the floor of the House to receive formal apologies from the Prime Minister and leaders of every political party. It was a historic day of nonpartisanship as we heard apologies to 80,000 survivors for the harms caused by more than a century of Canada's residential schooling policies for Indigenous children. The promises made on that day were a commitment to working together towards reconciliation. As elderly survivors leave us, it is essential that we keep alive the promises that were made to them, their families, and the communities. To mark this occasion, my constituent, Dr. Marie Wilson, is in Ottawa for the official release of her book, North to Nowhere, Song of a Truth and Reconciliation Commissioner. As we read the book, let us all remember the solemn promises made by each of our parties, and let us renew our determination to keep those promises. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Windsor West.
Two community champions in my riding, and both were named Ted. We mourn the passing of James Edward Ted Farron and Ted Boomer, both Windsor icons. Ted Farron was a longtime local business owner of Farron's Gourmet Butcher Shop and known in the boxing circles. He and his wife Michelle supported endless causes like hospice, recruiting physicians, and was one of only 4 civilians to be made an honorary member of the Firefighters Association. I first met Ted when he hired a person for my supportive employment program I ran. Ted Boomer is also synonymous with Windsor's Blues Fest, founding the event in 1995 and bringing in top performers to Windsor, Essex for decades, like Ace Frehley from Kiss, Nazareth, Iggy Pop, Jeff Healey, Gord Downey, to name a few. I got to know Ted when he and his wife, Louise, brought the Blues Fest to downtown and gave us international fame. Both Teds were local community boosters and will be missed by many. My condolences to their families and friends who can take comfort in knowing their local legacies will live on. I know I and many others remain influenced by their character and contributions.
The honourable member for Saint-Jean. There are those who never cease to amaze us. I'd like to make a request. Order, please. The honourable member for Saint-Jean will now begin again. There are some people who never cease to impress us, and Maëlie Grignon is one of them. The path that lies ahead of her in the field of science is bound to be paved with success. At just 15 years old, she has already won a Techno Science Prize and a bursary from the Université de Montréal when she competed in the Quebec Science Fair Finals. And her favorite subject is no less than the famous Higgs boson, which she talks about with great passion and knowledge. It's an honor to have her here on the Hill today. She's accompanied by the Science Fair spokesperson. He's been spokesperson for the past 10 years. He's an illusionist, Luc Langevin. He, too, is passionate about science. He pursued his studies up to the doctorate level in biophotonics. He was Maëlie's muse and inspired her to take an interest in physics when she was very young. Mr. Langevin, thank you for continuing to share your magic and your passion for science with us. Maëlie, I hope that you will be able to fulfill your dream of visiting the CERN, but above all, may your career, which I'll be following with great interest, be an exceptional one.
The honourable member from Souris Moose Mountain.
When you get sick and need treatment, what do? You go to a doctor. Unfortunately, after 9 years of this costly NDP Liberal coalition, Canada is hemorrhaging doctors at an alarming rate. The changes to the capital gains tax are having deep impacts on Canada's already struggling healthcare system, and the situation is only getting worse. Right. According to the Canadian Medical Association, the risk of already overstretched physicians leaving the profession or reducing their hours in response to heightened taxation is real. Over 6 million Canadians do not have access to a family doctor, and as someone who lives in a rural area that is short on healthcare professionals, it will be frightening to see family doctors, dentists, chiropractors leaving Canada in droves. Yeah. Doctors warned about the impacts of unnecessary and harmful tax, but they were ignored. And it will be regular Canadians who will lose access to diagnosis and treatment, ultimately paying the price for this government's incompetence. With Canada already lacking 330,000 family doctors and leaving every day, it is clear this NDP Liberal government is simply not worth the cost.
The honourable member from Vancouver Granville.
Mr. Speaker, on a cool September day in 1993, my very apolitical grandfather took me excitedly to a campaign office. As we approached the office, he said, "Remember this day. You're helping elect a woman who will show Canada the value that refugees can bring and what we Ismailis will do for Canada." That campaign office belonged to Mobina Jaffer. While she wouldn't win that election, she would eventually be named to the other place. where she would take her rightful place as a trailblazer in Parliament. Mobina Jaffer has been a champion for women's and children's rights, for human rights. A proud African, a proud Ismaili Muslim, a proud mother, daughter, grandmother, wife, and proud Canadian. Senator Jaffer's time in the other place has been all about improving the quality of life of others, always with humility and good humor. As her time in the other place comes to an end and she returns home to her beloved BC, we express our gratitude to her husband Nurullah and her children and family for sharing her with Canada. Thank you for your wisdom, your kindness that you have shown to me and to so many others. You have left your mark on Canada, leaving it a better place every single day. The value that refugees bring, what Ismailis and all of us can do, is what you have exemplified every single day of this remarkable career. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, before we begin oral questions, I'd like to remind you the importance, please, of ensuring your earpiece is either on your ear or in your desk.
Before we start oral questions, I just want to re-emphasize the importance of making sure that your earphones are either on your ears or in your desks so that we can make sure to provide the safest environment for our interpreters. Oral questions. Questions orales.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. 9 years ago, the Prime Minister promised that he would spend without control, but there would be a rich man somewhere who would pay, and not the middle class. 9 years later, what is the reality? 9 out of 10 members of the middle class are paying more in taxes. The wealthiest have doubled their wealth, their net wealth, according to a video put out by the Prime Minister a few days ago. And the majority of middle-class youth cannot even buy a home. Given that he has already broken that promise, why should we believe him now? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, our 2024 budget is based on creating generational fairness. Part of that is asking the wealthiest to pay a little bit more when they sell investments, very profitable investments. And it's with that we will invest in more housing for youth, more dental care for seniors, more spots in childcare for young families. We are there to help those who need it. The Conservative Party has just announced that they will side with the wealthiest. They won't be there to help the middle class and those working hard to join it. The Leader of the Opposition. That is exactly what he said 9 years ago, and the result, according to his own data published on his Twitter since his arrival in power, the wealth of the wealthiest has doubled, as taxes on the middle class and the cost of housing have also doubled. Mr. Speaker, why is it that every time he promises to increase taxes on the wealthiest, it's the poor and the middle class who foot the bill? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's the same types of justifications the Conservative Party gave in 2015 when they voted against increasing taxes on the wealthiest 1% and lower them for the middle class. It's the same type of argument they used to vote against the Canada Child Benefit that lifted hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. And today, they are in the same situation, defending advantages for the wealthiest in this country, while we are asking for a little more to help with housing for young people, helping seniors with dental care, and many other things, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
9 years ago, the Prime Minister promised he could spend uncontrollably and there'd be a rich guy on a hill somewhere who would pay the bill. The middle class wouldn't have to pay. Well, what is the result? According to him, the total net worth of the richest Canadians has doubled since he took office. Meanwhile, 9 in 10 middle-class Canadians are paying more tax. Housing costs have doubled, so 76% of middle-class youth believe they'll never afford a home. 2 million people line up at a food bank because they can't afford to eat on a middle-class salary. Given that he already broke this exact same promise over 9 years, why should we believe him this time?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if it didn't have real-world impacts on Canadians, it would almost be amusing to watch the Conservative leader tie himself in knots to try and justify voting in favour of advantages for the wealthy Canadians when they sell really profitable investments. We are asking them to pay a little bit more so we can invest more in housing for young people to be able to have the same kinds of opportunities previous generations did. We're delivering dental care for over 200,000 seniors in just the last 6 weeks. We're delivering more spaces in child care. We're stepping up for Canadians. They're stepping up for the rich.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Real world impacts. That's what we have today after 9 years of this Prime Minister promising to tax, borrow, and spend us into fairness. But according to the StatsCan data he put out himself since he became Prime Minister, the net worth of the wealthiest Canadians has doubled. Why? Because the taxes he puts always land on the middle class. 9 in 10 middle class people are paying higher taxes. The vast majority of Canadians, and 100% of middle class, are paying higher carbon tax, and his last round of small business tax hikes hit plumbers and electricians, not the rich. Why is it that every time he mentions the middle class, they get poor?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our price on pollution delivers more money to 8 out of 10 Canadians right across the country with the Canada Carbon Rebate. And today, Mr. Speaker, there's an opportunity for everyone in this House to stand up and ask the wealthiest Canadians to pay a little more when they sell extremely profitable investments. We are doing that on this side of the House. The Conservatives will be protecting the advantage that is there for the wealthiest Canadians while we invest more in housing, while we invest more in dental care, while we invest more in Canadians who need it.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, if you are a small business owner, you have even $1 of investment gain, you pay this higher tax that the Prime Minister is promising because there's no exemption inside the 300,000 small businesses. And it's incredible that during a housing shortage, he wants to tax home builders. During a healthcare shortage, he wants to tax away our doctors. During a food price crisis, he wants to tax our farmers. And while our economy is shrinking more than any other economy in the G7, he wants to tax our small business job creators. Mr. Speaker, isn't this the definition of insanity?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
For 8 weeks since we put our budget forward, the Conservatives have been incredibly careful not to say a thing about the capital gains rate that we're raising. They didn't want to talk about it for 2 full months, and today, when they are choosing to vote with the wealthiest Canadians and against young Canadians who need more housing, young Canadians who need a better break, seniors who need dental care, they're all trying to spin it in 9 different ways. The reality is they have an opportunity to vote with middle-class Canadians, and they're choosing to vote against them.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister doesn't have the habit of listening or reading to what the RCMP suggests, but the RCMP is saying it doesn't have the tools to counter a threat to security, to social peace, the threat of hate speech. It doesn't have the tools to do its work. Obviously, the religious defense in the criminal code that allows people to say and incite violence is a precious tool for those who want to sow violence. Does the Prime Minister agree to repeal the religious exemption from the criminal code? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, hate speech and anti-Semitism have no place in Canada. Our government fights racism and hatred like no government has done in the past, introducing an act on online harms, funding increased protection for mosques, synagogues, and places of worship, and our plan to criminalize the Holocaust denial. We recognize there is more to do. We will continue to work with our police services with the necessary laws to strengthen protection for all in this country. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. How to waste 35 precious seconds. Mr. Speaker, the streets of Montreal and other cities in Quebec and Canada are subject to protests and open invitations to hatred, when it is not, frankly, to violence. There are even calls to exterminate the people of Israel. What does it take for the Prime Minister to protect the people he is responsible for? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, for years we've been investing to create more protection for mosques and synagogues and places of worship and community centres. We will continue to work with police forces across the country to protect people and highlight that it's important for all Canadians to remember our values of respect, openness, tolerance, and acceptance. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to be there to, yes, allow people to protest within the law and within peace, but also be there to fight hate speech and calls for violence.
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
Yesterday, the Liberals finally woke up. They realized that it's unfair for nurses and carpenters to pay more taxes than billionaires. Well, clearly they didn't have a problem with that for the past 8 years. So why did the Prime Minister let carpenters and nurses pay more taxes than billionaires for 8 straight budgets in a row?
I'm just going to ask the Honourable Member from Caribou Prince George to please not take the floor unless he's recognized by the chair. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, one of the very first things we did in 2015 was raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% and lower them for the middle class. I will recall that the NDP at that time actually voted against that measure. But right now, we're putting forward a measure to ask the wealthiest Canadians who make a tremendous amount of profits when they sell extremely profitable investments to actually pay a little bit more on those profits so that we can invest in more housing, in more supports for seniors, in a range of things to create fairness for every generation. The Conservatives are choosing to vote against that, and they're standing once again with the wealthiest.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Have done this 8 years ago.
Yesterday, the Liberals woke up. They realized that it wasn't fair for nurses to pay more tax than billionaires, but they didn't think it was unfair over the past 8 years. Why has the Prime Minister forced nurses to pay more taxes than billionaires for 8 straight budgets? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, in 2015, we increased taxes for the wealthiest 1%, and we decreased them for the middle class. And since then, at that time, the NDP voted against those measures. We are fighting for the middle class and those working hard to join it. That is why we are asking the wealthiest, who make huge profits by selling their investments, to pay a little more so that we can deliver on housing, deliver on dental care, deliver more childcare spaces for Canadians who need them. Unfortunately, once again, the Conservatives are siding with the wealthiest against middle-class Canadians.
The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
The Finance Minister is about to impose another job-killing, wage-cutting, price-hiking tax on Canadians, and she wants us to believe the latest fairy tale that somehow we'll all be better off if the Prime Minister just raises taxes again. We've heard this for 9 years. Let's take a look at the result. Canada is on track for the worst decline in living standards in 4 decades. 9 out of 10 middle-class families now pay more in income taxes, and Stats Canada says that Liberal policies since 2015 have cost Canadians $4,200 in lost wages per worker. They've made the middle class worse off with their last 8 budgets. Why should anyone believe that the 9th time is the charm?
The Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, for the past 8 weeks, we have watched the unedifying spectacle of the Conservatives squiggling and squirming, deflecting and evading. But today they have no choice. Today they had to pick a side. And we're seeing now the side that they have chosen. The Conservatives are coming out against fairness. They think a nurse or a plumber should pay tax at a higher rate than a multimillionaire. Canadians are watching. Canadians now see whose side the Conservatives are on.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
For 9 years, Canadians have suffered from the terrible consequences of Liberal economic policies. And now, what are they doing? For young Canadians struggling to be able to afford to buy their first home, they're raising taxes on home builders. For families barely able to afford groceries and lined up at food banks, they're raising taxes on the farmers who produce the food. And for thousands of Canadians who have gone years without having a family doctor, they're chasing even more doctors away with a new tax on medical professions. How is any of that fair?
The Deputy Prime Minister and the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have been trying so hard to fake it. They have been trying so hard to pretend they actually care about working Canadians. But today, there's a vote coming, and they have had to finally pick a side. Today, every single member of this House is going to have to choose. Are you on the side of a nurse, a plumber, a teacher? Or are you on the side of a multimillionaire? And the Conservatives are very clear. They're against fairness. They're in favor of the wealthy lobbyists who advise them.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
Canadians are finding that the harder that they work, the more they are punished. The incompetent finance minister wants people to believe that her job-killing taxes impacts only the very rich. It's doctors, it's farmers, it's small business owners, it's a restaurant that's been in the community and leases its building, it's tradespeople like plumbers and roofers who reinvest in their businesses and their equipment and eventually want to stop working. She's raising their taxes in the name of fairness because she spent all the money that she already took for them. How is any of that fair?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, one thing that is kind of astonishing is that after having been mute, or you might want to say gagged, for 8 weeks, the Conservatives have finally found some passion around this issue. And isn't it astonishing that when given an actual opportunity to choose to side with a plumber, to choose to side with a nurse, or to side with their multi-millionaire lobbyist pals, the Conservatives are choosing to vote against fairness. Canadians are watching.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
The answer again proves that the minister does not read her own briefing notes. When a small business owner retires and sells their assets, the minister wants to take a bigger piece of that because she couldn't control her own spending. Those are the people that the Liberals call rich. They're people like my own father. If he was alive today, he'd be left high and dry in his retirement years, the years where he needed those earnings the most. He started as a taxi driver in this country and went on to invest in a small business year after year in a personal corp because he didn't have a pension. How is any of that fair?
Here, here, here. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, squiggle and squirm as you might, it is really hard to put lipstick on a pig. And that is exactly what the Conservatives are trying to do today. The Conservatives have found themselves unable when it really counted to side with working people. They have been unable to vote for fairness, to vote for the nurse, to vote for the plumber, and now they're evading responsibility for that choice. But we won't let them. We're in favor of fairness, and they are not.
The honourable member from Calgary, Forest Lawn.
This fast and furious finance minister unveiled her latest job-killing scheme to screw over Canada's middle class to bankroll her incompetency. Newcomers like my family came here for the Canadian dream, had very little, worked hard, saved money, and started a small business. She calls them tax cheats and vilifies their success. This job-killing capital gains tax hike will destroy their life's work. Hey, they can save it all by canceling their Disney Plus. But before this minister runs away from the mic again, does she think her attack on small businesses is actually fair?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, for the past 8 weeks, the Conservatives have been dithering and delaying and deflecting. They were squirming. They were so uncomfortable because they recognized they had to make a really big choice. Were they actually going to be on the side of working people, Canadians who live paycheck to paycheck, or on the side of multimillionaires? Well, today, we know whose side they're on. We are voting for fairness. The Conservatives are voting against it, as we always knew they would.
The honourable member from Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Her and the leader of the NDP can do as many photo ops with their bikes as they want, but these champagne socialists are taking money from the middle class to give to rich liberal insiders, their elitist Bay Street buddies, and the bloated bureaucracy. This job-killing tax hike vilifies success, punishing small businesses and their workers. That's why GDP per person in Canada is collapsing and Canadians are poor. Before she spends another $1 billion next week to service her debt, can she tell us, is this fair?
I ask all members on all sides of the House to please to not express yourselves unless you're recognized by the Speaker. It's for a whole bunch of reasons, but the very least of all is so that we can hear the question and hear the answer. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to read out a quote from a debate in the House of Commons. Quote, "Monstrous increases in capital gains are making the rich vastly richer and creating a kind of aristocratic feudal economy." You know who said that? The member for Carleton. He did, yeah. And today, he is leading his party in voting to make those gains even more monstrous, in voting in favor of that aristocratic feudal economy. Well, we vote for fairness. They vote against it.
Order, please.
Ask members to the right, please, to keep their comments unless they're recognized by the chair.
The Honourable Member for Drummond. The Coalition Sauvons-Lassique informed us in an open letter that the NFB has decided to modernize its aid to independent cinema program. Modernizing should mean improving, but unfortunately that's not the case. Before, to access the NFB's editing rooms, there were two conditions: be a filmmaker and have a project funded by a public institution. The NFB would impose 3 new conditions, including compliance with its editorial line. When a crown corporation wants to impose a message, it's called propaganda. Will the Minister allow this to happen? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for his question. I'm aware that currently the NFB is looking at its program to support independent producers. They have a clear mandate to support independent producers in all their diversity, including French. I will ensure that they continue to respect their mandate, and I invite producers to share their concerns with the NFB management. They are independent, and they will make decisions accordingly. The Honourable Member for Drummond. Pierre Perrault, Norman McLaren, Léa Poole, Micheline Lacteau, Denis Arcand, Pierre Falardeau, Denis Villeneuve. All these Quebec filmmakers have benefited from the NFB, a veritable laboratory for our independent and audacious cinema. And it's a safe bet that none of them would match the NFB's editorial line today. Above all, none would agree to submit to its editorial line. We know the NFB is independent. The minister doesn't need to remind us, but we thought our cinema was too. Can the minister tell the NFB to drop its ideological criteria for our filmmakers? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the years, we've always supported the NFB, among others, because we know how important it is for the next generation of cinema in Quebec and Canada. All of the names given by my colleague highlights how much talent and quality we have in Quebec and Canada, so we will continue to support them. And that's why we've increased just about all budgets in culture, because we know how important it is. And we've done that because we believe in our talent, in our culture, and we will continue to do so, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Drummond. Canada's Independent Cinema Assistance Program was working well. No one was complaining. But it lacked a little too much constraint for the NFB's taste. And that's how it is everywhere now with crown corporations. Letting artists be artists is no longer an option, it seems. They have to be told who to be, what to think, how to express themselves on what issues. They have to be molded, put into boxes, all the time. The case of the NFB is worrying, and it's natural for the cultural sector to mobilize and protest. Now, which side is the minister on? Art or state propaganda? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, I thank the producers of the coalition for their work, all those in Quebec who stand up to ask institutions to support them well. And the government is listening. We've shown it budget after budget since 2015 by setting up new supports, especially with Telefilm. We support the NFB. We've added money to the Canadian Media Fund, all to ensure that we have diversity in content, that there's capacity for producers to contribute their talent to our screens, and to have Quebec and Canada shine around the world. We will continue to be there for our cultural industry, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cumberland Colchester.
Speaker, the average doctor is $300,000 in debt from medical school, and the Ontario Medical Association says the latest NDP Liberal tax grab will, and I quote, put further pressure on the viability and sustainability of a fragile system and could force existing physicians out of practice and dissuade new grads from practicing in Canada. Canadians are in the midst of a healthcare crisis. Why is the Minister of Finance making it harder for Canadians to find a family doctor?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the critic for his first question in almost a year on the matter of the healthcare crisis in this country. I could tell him that it's extremely important that nurses and doctors and that everybody pay the same tax rate, and we want to make sure that it's fair. And we've been making critical investments, Mr. Speaker, with every province and every territory, $200 billion. But in order to make those investments in our healthcare system, we need a fair and just tax system. That's why we're making sure we do that, Mr. Speaker, precisely so that we can make the investments and not have the cuts we would see with the Conservatives.
The Honourable Member from Cumberland Colchester.
Speaker, every week I speak to Canadians who do not have a family doctor. How is this fair? The elderly, Canadians with chronic diseases, Canadians with mental health struggles, kids with cancer, none of them can access the healthcare system. How is this fair? And the Canadian Medical Association says things are only going to get worse. They say this tax will jeopardize efforts to recruit and retain doctors. As physicians leave this country en masse, how many Canadians will go without health care due to this NDP Liberal tax grab?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, a fair and just tax system won't threaten our healthcare system. What will threaten our healthcare system is eliminating dental care for seniors, is eliminating pharmacare, is cutting into healthcare, and that's exactly what we've seen from the Conservatives. We were able to make over the next 10 years, $200 billion worth of investments with provinces and territories. Those are put at direct risk and jeopardy because of Conservative cuts. And I find it interesting that the only time they've ever asked healthcare questions in this House is when we started talking about fairness and making sure that everybody pays their fair share.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. After 9 years of this Prime Minister, over 2.3 million people don't have a family doctor in Quebec. Serge Gagné, a retiree, told Le Journal de Montréal, "I was told, you shouldn't be here, you don't have a family doctor. The Canadian Medical Association is clear. In the midst of a doctor shortage, these changes could jeopardize efforts across Canada to recruit and retain quality healthcare professionals." How many families, mothers, and seniors will be deprived of a doctor by this Prime Minister because they will have chosen to practice elsewhere? How is this fair for Mr. Gagné? The Honourable Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, for the first time, the Conservative Party is asking questions about our healthcare system. It's so interesting to me because what is threatening our healthcare system is not a fair and equitable system. It's Conservative cuts. They want to cut investments, major investments to dental care, to pharmacare, and agreements with each province and territory. We must continue to invest in our healthcare system, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Prime Minister, Quebec farmers are crying out for help. Instead of hearing their cry, the Prime Minister has chosen to hike taxes on them. He ignored their representatives who said categorically by increasing the capital gains inclusion rate to 2/3, we're jeopardizing the success of intergenerational farm transfers to young farmers across Canada. The Prime Minister is jeopardizing the future of regional agriculture. How is this fair to future generations of farmers? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, as the daughter of a farmer, I understand the situation of our farmers, and we increased the cumulative exemption for farmers. But I'd also like to point out that Quebec has a choice. The Quebec Finance Minister decided to follow the federal example with capital gains because Quebec needs revenues, for example, for health care. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, Jean-René Patry is 80 years old. He's worked his whole life and still is, but he's getting tired. He works, but he has to live in his van. With his pension and odd jobs, he can't afford an apartment in Montreal, all because the Liberals and Conservatives left housing to speculators. Mr. Patry knows exactly what's needed, social housing ASAP. There are thousands of people like him who can't find housing. What does the Minister of Housing have to say to all the Mr. Patrys out there in Quebec and Canada? The Honourable the Honourable Minister. What I would say to Mr. Patry is that today is a historic day because today we're putting in place tax measures that will precisely provide for fairness, which will allow us to invest in housing and pharmacare. Today, and I hope the NDP will support us, we're making sure we're asking multimillionaires to do a little bit more to help people like Mr. Patry.
The Honourable Member from Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, over 1 million Canadians with disabilities cannot afford bare necessities. They can't keep up with groceries, housing, or their medication costs. The Liberals promised that their new Canada Disability Benefit would lift Canadians with disabilities out of poverty. It won't. $200 doesn't even scratch the surface of an adequate income. Will the Finance Minister admit they've messed up the rollout of this benefit, listen to the community feedback, and fix their botched mess?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Diversity, Inclusion and People with Disabilities.
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member opposite for that question.
Has brought in the disability benefit. We are the government that has funded this benefit to the highest tune within this budget to the tune of $6 billion. There will be 600,000 Canadians who will be supported through this benefit. This is a critical moment for Canadians, for our government, for all of us working together. I want to thank all advocates who have been advocating for this and working for this. We are building a fairer and more inclusive Canada. Thank you, Mr. President.
The honourable member from Mississauga-Malton.
Mr. Speaker, Canadian families know that this government will be there to support them when they need it most. Government programs such as $10 a day childcare and a pharmacare system that helps pay for contraceptives have allowed a record number of women to enter the workforce. This is huge for Canadian families and the economy. Can the Minister of Families notify this House how we will continue to advance this progress and further enhance generational fairness?
The Honourable Minister for Families and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we are proud of the programs that we have put in place to help Canadian families get ahead. Generational fairness means asking the most fortunate Canadians to pay a little bit more. It means ensuring that our tax system is fair. Today, Conservatives have made it clear they are not in favor of fairness. They would rather cancel $10 a day childcare, cancel our national school food program, cancel dental care for those who need it. Really, Mr. Speaker, this is definitely not fair for Canadians.
The honourable member for Foothills.
The Liberals' increase in the capital gains inclusion rate from 50 to 60% is a direct attack on Canadian farm families. The Liberals like to claim that this will only impact the ultra-rich, but that just isn't true. This will impact family farms and young farmers who are just trying to take over the family farm. And the average grain farm will easily exceed the lifetime exemption rate. This tax increase isn't fair and will jeopardize the economic viability of farm families and our rural communities. Will the Prime Minister end his attack on family farms who are just trying to put food on our table?
The Honourable Minister for Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate my honourable colleague's question, but it's important to note that when he and his government were in power, they slashed $500 million at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. They slashed $200 million out of the Business Risk Management Program. And of course, the question I have is how much more would you slash if you ever got the chance to slash? But I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, that we have reinstated the funding to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and we have reinstated the funding to the Business Risk Management Program. We have and will continue to support farmers in this country, Mr. Speaker.
I'd like to remind the Honourable Minister that, of course, questions should be put through me. That's the best way that it should be done. The Honourable Member from Foothills.
Well, it's still not reassuring that the Agriculture Minister still doesn't know that there's going to be a capital gains inclusion rate change that is going to impact Canadian farmers. Farmers who are trying to work hard every day to feed Canadians. And the only thing that this tax change is going to do is feed an obese Liberal government. They say this is about fairness, but it isn't fair to young farmers. When they buy the family operation, they are burdened with millions of dollars in debt. This is a gift to the ultra-rich who will buy up family farmland, making mega multinational industrial farms. Will the Prime Minister admit this is not a tax on the ultra-rich, this is an attack on the very survival of family farms?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, over the past 9 years, this Conservative Party has a record. When they were asked to vote to lower taxes on the middle class, what did they say? No. When they were asked to approve a Canada Child Benefit, what did they say? No. When they were asked to vote on childcare, on pharmacare, on dental care, what did they say? They said no. Why is it when Canadians look to this Conservative Party to stand up for them, they take a seat?
I don't like to remind all members on the government side, as well as all members generally, that chanting is not permitted in the House. The Honourable Member from South Shore, St. Margaret's.
Lobstermen in Nova Scotia fish for our food, risking their lives in the winter. Waves crashing over them, fishing in blizzards and high seas. They risk their lives for 40 years so they can save a little to retire on the sale of their boat and their license. The NDP Liberal latest tax grab on fishermen is to increase massively the tax on the sale of their licensed boat and gear even after the fishing exemption. So why do the NDP Liberals think that robbing fishermen of a dignified and honest retirement is fair?
Yes. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, today is an important day for Canadians because today, after taking 8 weeks of truly undignified dithering and deflecting, the Conservatives have finally shown their true colors. And now we know what they really stand for. They had a chance to stand with the plumbers, with the welders, with the nurses, with the teachers. But they've decided that multimillionaires should pay lower taxes than working Canadians. That's just...
The Honourable Member from South Shore, St. Margaret's.
The only thing this Liberal minister is doing is bringing in retirement-killing taxes on fishermen. Mrs. J and her husband from Nova Scotia worked for 50 years to build their lobster and fish buying business. They sold their business to create their modest retirement income by investing that proceeds and creating a humble retirement. They paid their fair share of taxes already, but Liberals want to take more of the retirement income. Why does this Prime Minister think that robbing an 85-year-old widow of her hard-earned, dignified retirement income is fair?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Speaker, we have already today, at last, established that the Conservatives are against fairness, that they are against a nurse or a welder paying tax at a fair rate. They want a nurse or welder to pay more tax than a multimillionaire. What else the Conservatives are saying? They're saying they're going to cut. They're going to cut the dental care that is providing care for people in Atlantic Canada. They're going to cut the early learning and child care. They're going to cut pharmacare.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Maskinongé.
Colleagues, the Honourable Member
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Maskinongé. Harvests were terrible last year, partly because of natural disasters. Last week, farmers finally reached a deal with Quebec for compensation, and they're saying loud and clear it's Ottawa's turn now. Well, fresh produce growers are in town today. They met with the minister this morning to remind him that they exist and they deserve support. They've been demanding emergency federal assistance for almost a year now. When will the minister finally listen to them and trigger agri-recovery?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate my honourable colleague's question and concern, and he knows I am concerned too. And I did meet them and appreciate the work that you have done with the farmers, but he's well aware that agri-recovery is a joint effort between the Government of Canada and the provincial governments across the country. I can share that with the House that we have been working closely with the Government of Quebec and things are progressing well. I know the farmers need the money and we'll work as fast as we can, making sure we follow proper procedure to get the money in the hands of the farmers as quickly as we can. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Maskinongé. The Weather Channel is forecasting another high-risk summer for natural disasters, and the federal government has still done nothing to compensate for last year's. As a result, we're off to a pretty bad start. 1 in 5 farms is unable to pay their debts. 1 in 10 farms is at risk of going out of business within a year. Mr. Speaker. So emergency help is urgently needed. Producers have been calling on Ottawa for almost a year. Quebec has been asking Ottawa to act for 7 months. Will the minister finally trigger agri-recovery? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, again, I appreciate my honourable colleague's question and concern. I'm fully aware that the farmers need the funding as quickly as possible. There is a procedure to follow. I think my honourable colleague is well aware that we're following that procedure with the Quebec government, and as soon as I possibly can, and it's approved, I will make sure the money is in the hands of the farmers that's much needed as quickly as possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Kelowna Lake Country.
During a housing crisis, the Liberal finance minister is making things worse. The new capital gains tax will kill investments in Canada and drive up the cost for those who provide housing. Rental experts are saying the consequences of this tax hike would be disastrous in the short, medium, and long term, citing concerns for viability of long-term investment. This will lead to less places to rent and more cost to renters. Canadians are already facing the highest average asking rent ever. So how is it fair that the Liberals are putting the brakes on new housing when Canadians can barely afford to rent?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, let's remember that this member is from a party whose leader got 7 affordable units built when he was in charge of housing. Let's remember that their housing plan would actually put more tax on home builders. And let's remember that this is the party that believes in cuts, cuts, cuts. They're going to cut dental care, they're going to cut pharmacare, they're going to cut early learning and child.
The honourable member from Kelowna Lake Country.
That member has lost all credibility with Canadians, and a job-killing tax on healthcare, homes, farms, and small businesses is the last thing that Canadians need right now in a cost-of-living crisis. This new tax won't build any homes. It will only discourage investment of purpose-built rentals. Richard Lyle, residential construction expert, said there's not a chance the Liberals will meet their own housing targets. Housing starts are down, and this tax hike will only make it worse. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. How is it fair that the Liberals are raising taxes when home building starts are down?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
With all due respect to the member, Mr. Speaker, she talks about credibility. She was in the House of Commons committee meeting responsible for housing when an expert from the rental sector told her that her party's position on not waiving GST for the building of purpose-built rentals was deeply irresponsible. That's a direct quote, Mr. Speaker. On top of that, she voted against her community of Kelowna getting almost $32 million to incent zoning changes that will lead to the building of 20,000 homes over the next 10 years. That's the Conservative Party, Mr. Speaker. They identify problems, but they never offer solutions.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Échemins-Lévis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 9 years of this Liberal government, rents are getting higher and higher, and affordable housing is becoming scarcer and scarcer. Canadians are distressed by this housing crisis, and now the Prime Minister wants to make things worse by changing capital gains tax. According to the Quebec Corporation of Landlords, this change will push rents higher, which is definitely to be avoided in the current context. Why does the Prime Minister want to raise taxes on housing in the midst of a housing crisis? How is that possible, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister of Economic Development for Quebec. Mr. Speaker, I have good news for my colleague opposite. According to Stats Can, in April, there was a record high number of housing permits, of construction permits in 1 month. 22,600. That's a lot more than 6, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, here on this side of the House, We know that countries with huge inequalities between rich and poor do not fare well. With childcare, the Canada Child Benefit, dental care, affordable housing, among other things, we are there to support those in need. In Canada, we're building a fairer tax system for all generations. Can the minister tell us what our government is doing to strengthen our social safety net for the benefit of all Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Economic Development for Quebec. Mr. Speaker, it makes no sense that a nurse has a higher tax rate than a multimillionaire, but that is the reality right now. We have a duty to ensure tax fairness. By increasing the capital gains tax, we'll be able to build more housing, cover more pharmacare, and strengthen our social safety net. It's clear that the other side has chosen a different camp, the camp of multimillionaires. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals will do anything to look like they're on the side of the middle class. But people aren't fooled after 9 years of inane policies that have deepened inequalities. Now they're going after the dead and the bereaved with the capital gains tax. We're talking about a tax hike on inheritance. Are the Liberals so desperate to make political gains that they're willing to go after the dead and bereaved? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, today is an important day for Canadians because today every member has to make a choice. Each of us has to decide whether we're in favor of fairness, if we think a nurse should pay less tax than a multimillionaire. For us, our party, we have made that choice. But now Canadians can see what the Conservatives think. They're against fairness and in favor of multimillionaires. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Yeah, Mr. Speaker, we've made our choice, and our choice is to think of seniors who are trying to leave an inheritance to their children, but these Liberal tax measures will be such that taxes will gobble up their inheritance. Can the Minister of Finance explain why people's inheritances will be gobbled up by the Liberal government? The Honourable Government House Leader. In 9 years in this House, and I would even say in the 20 years since the Leader of the Opposition has had a seat in this House, Conservatives have voted how? They voted against tax cuts for the middle class, against the Canada Child Benefit, against, every time, against childcare subsidies, against dental care, against pharmacare. Every time Canadians ask the Conservatives to stand up for them, they stay in their seats, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Simcoe North.
There you have it, Mr. Speaker. Farmers, fishers, families, physicians, all will be impacted by this tax. The government either didn't know this was the case or doesn't care, because had they actually taken the time to ask StatsCan, they might have found out that almost 50% of the people impacted by this tax otherwise make less than $100,000 a year. So why does this government continue to insist on purposely misleading Canadians about who will be impacted by this job-killing tax?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the only party trying to mislead Canadians is the Conservatives, because they have been trying to pose as the party of the little guy. But today, they've had to make a choice. It was a hard choice for them. It took them 8 weeks of struggle. But at the end of the day, the Conservatives made the choice they always make. They're voting against fairness. They're voting in favor of austerity. They're voting in favor of their rich lobbyist friends. That's what
The Honourable Member from Don Valley East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many young people in my riding of Don Valley East are worried about not being able to find a place to call their home.
They see housing being used more and more as a way to make money, and it's hurting their possibility of home ownership. Can the Minister of Public Service and Procurement tell this House what is the government's plan to make housing more affordable and to help build a fairer future for all young Canadians?
Good question. The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unlike Conservatives who've been treating home ownership as a casino, we put in place a foreign buyer's ban so that foreign speculators no longer price out hard-working Canadian families. Unlike the Conservatives, we're working with MPs in the GTA area to use public lands for affordable homes and not for the profits of the highest bidders. And our plan for tax fairness is asking wealthier Canadians to pay a little bit more so we can build more homes faster. Now, will the Leader of the Opposition support that plan for housing fairness and tax fairness? Probably not.
The Honourable Member from Timmins, James Bay.
For decades, the Mushkegowuk Cree of James Bay have fought to end substandard health and to get a proper hospital built. But now that the deadline is looming for the future of the Winnebago Hospital, the federal government has walked away. If they don't return to the table with funding, the construction companies will quit and provincial funding will evaporate. And all these years of hard work will be lost. The communities and the NDP have called on the Prime Minister to intervene. It's now or never. So is the Minister willing to commit today to flow the funds so this hospital in James Bay can finally be built?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Every Canadian in this country deserves access to health care, and that's why we're working so closely with the hospital, with Ontario, to make sure that residents in the Moosonee area can actually access health care, just like every other person in Ontario. Mr. Speaker, I met with the board yesterday. I met with Grand Chief Fiddler, and the Prime Minister has also written a letter confirming our commitment to this project.
The Honourable Member from Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are jeopardizing affordable childcare by refusing fair pay and benefits for childcare workers. In Alberta, experts say childcare workers earn less than a livable wage, driving many away from the sector. But this is an issue across Canada, as low pay and benefits are common for childcare workers, most of whom are Indigenous and women of colour. When will the Liberals get serious about affordable quality childcare and create a national workforce strategy for childcare workers that actually works?
The Honourable Minister for Families and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for the question and for her advocacy. I know she cares deeply about early childhood education. I'm happy to share back in response to her question that we are working with the provinces and territories on a national strategy for the workforce. I look forward to moving that forward. There's a lot of work to be done as we work to create 250,000 new spaces, and the early childhood workers are at the heart of that strategy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And that brings to the end of question period, but I know all members will be particularly interested in this recognition. This year, Canadians are commemorating the 80th anniversary of D-Day, giving us the opportunity to recognize the sacrifices that the men and women in the Canadian Armed Forces have made and continue to make on our behalf. Pour les citoyens de toutes les régions du pays.
Canadians across the country, it's for them that I wish to underscore the sacrifices made by members of the Canadian Armed Forces, sacrifices that they have made and continue to make for us.
Centennial of the Royal Canadian Air Force. Accordingly, I wish to draw to the attention of members in the presence of the gallery of members of the Royal Canadian Air Force, including Lieutenant General Eric Kenny, Commander of the Royal Canadian Air Force, and Lorena McKinnott, who is departing after 10 years of serving as its honorary colonel. I see rising on a point of order the honourable member from Vancouver East.
Speaker,
there's been consultation with the parties, with all the parties, and
even before the honourable member has been able to raise the issue, I'm hearing that there are no's in this room. Once again, I'd like to remind all members, please, to do negotiations as much as possible, consultations, so that we can use the time of the House very efficiently. The honourable member from Vancouver East is rising on another point of order.
Yes, I am. Actually, I haven't even said what I was going to say. I'm not quite sure how members will know preemptively what I was going to raise.
Tell her to comply with your order, Speaker.
So I'm sorry for the honourable member from Vancouver East. I couldn't hear her at all because my microphone light was still lit. Can the honourable member please just make her point so I could just hear what she's raising?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There has been consultation with...
Oh my God. So I'm afraid I'm hearing it right off the top that there isn't unanimous consent for the honourable member. It being 3:19, the House will now proceed to taking of the deferred recorded division on the motion of Mr. Villemur related to the business of supply. Comme il est 15h19, la Chambre...
It being 3:19, the House will now proceed to the taking of the deferred recorded division on the motion of Mr. Villemur relating to the business of supply. Call in the members.